You mentioned income, and Ryan, I wanted to have a bit of a talk about the minimum wage. Should there be a federal minimum wage? Like, should the power lie in the states? Can one size fit all here?
Well, I think there are big risks with increasing the minimum wage to a very, very high level. Economists seem to agree these days that if a minimum wage is set modestly, the overall impact on unemployment doesn't seem to be that significant, though certain groups, particularly very, very low skill groups, young workers in particular, it can have some adverse consequences on the job opportunities that they're going to get. And certainly in an age where we're seeing investments in automation of jobs, it's not clear to me why, in effect, you'd want to kind of subsidize automation by making low-skilled labor more expensive. To the extent that we have minimum wages, I think it makes sense for them to be set at the state and local level, where at least there's more likelihood of politicians, regulators setting them with a view to the impact on the local labor market. But look, my whole work at Cato really has been trying to shift this debate. Often when we talk about issues to do with poverty, we focus on income and wealth all the time, and what really matters to people is how far that income and wealth can go in meeting the needs of a decent life. And I think too much focus in politics is put on the minimum wage and on redistributive spending, when actually there's a vast range of government policies, from zoning and land use planning laws, from how we regulate childcare, from what we do in terms of tariffs and protections that raise the cost of food and clothing and footwear, things that disproportionately affect people on low incomes and African American communities as part of that. And I think we need a much bigger focus from thinking about poverty by looking at actually how far can income and wealth go in getting people to a decent life. And if we reform those areas and had a government approach which at first did no harm, then perhaps we wouldn't need to always think about ways to correct problems that we see through further income transfers or through raising the minimum wage. We could achieve a living wage through lowering the cost of living rather than raising the nominal wage rate.
Speaking of meeting basic needs and the challenges of that, Dr. Darity, some argue that driving up wages could make getting these basic goods very much more expensive. The cost will fall disproportionately on the poor, on people with low income, or workers themselves. What are your thoughts of that argument, and specifically perhaps the economic impact of like a $15 federal
So
minimum
let me
wage?
angle into that in a slightly different way. I want to make a sharp distinction between income and wealth. Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about the minimum wage, we're talking about an income impact. Right. We're not talking about any significant impact on the wealth position of families or households. So the minimum wage is something that I think is overstated in terms of its importance, but for slightly different reasons from the reasons that you emphasize. So if an individual doesn't have a job at all, the effective minimum wage is zero. In addition, the minimum wage does not guarantee a sufficient number of hours of work to ensure that people will receive an adequate benefits package. So I've been a proponent of an alternative to the minimum wage as a mechanism for trying to set a floor on the compensation that workers receive in American society. I've been an advocate for a number of years of a federal job guarantee, which is an idea that arose in the 1940s in Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Economic Bill of Rights, which we now are talking about as an Economic Bill of Rights for the 21st century. Federal job guarantee would mean that every American adult would be assured of having employment in the United States, and that employment would be provided by the federal government. So any individual could turn to the federal government and say, I want a job, in the event that they cannot find adequate employment in the private sector. What would this mean? The federal government would ensure that every American would have a wage that would be sufficient to put them above the poverty line and provide them with a benefits package that would be comparable to the benefits package that is available for all American civil servants at the present moment. What would that do in terms of private sector compensation? It would require the private sector to at least match the minimum package that's offered by the federal government. And so it would push up the floor on the compensation for all Americans. So we wouldn't necessarily need a minimum wage because that would effectively compensate for that kind of strategy. And we would also be in a position to conduct a set of services for the American public that are not adequately provided today through the federal job guarantee. So I'm a public sector employment advocate in the context of the provision of public sector opportunities for employment for every single American.